right, let's get started. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, E-commerce Integration with Dynamics 365, the challenges, benefits, process, and implementation. I am your host, Vanessa, the Digital Marketing Manager here at OMNI. Thank you so much for joining us. We're just going to wait a couple seconds for the rest of us to join, and we'll get started. This is a conversational Q&A webinar where we will be going through some key questions about implementation and integration for Dynamics 365 with particular focus on finance and operations. We encourage questions, of course, from all of you towards the end of the presentation. We have an open section for Q&A, but if you have any questions, please in the Zoom chat, please put in any questions that you might have and we will be sure to answer them. So I'm just going to give it one more minute and we'll get started. Okay. So I'm going to introduce the companies joining us today. Of course, first is Pangea Consultants. Pangea is a global software consulting firm operating across multiple business sectors with experience in identifying, assessing, and solving your business challenges through the implementation, integration, and support of the Microsoft Dynamics 365 ecosystem. And of course, we have OMNI. OMNI is an integration platform partner for real-time, agile, and scalable iPaaS data integration. We empower businesses to accelerate their growth by integrating their systems, channels, partners, and applications together based on their needs. I want, of course, to introduce you to our expert panelists joining us today. First off, we have Robin H. Smith, who has had over 28 years of experience in the supply chain and data integration world. Robin is the co-founder and CEO of OMNI. Thank you so much for joining us, Robin.
Thank you.
And of course, we have Santiago Morales. He is Pangea's managing partner. His leading global mission is to help his clients' organizations thrive by bringing their disparate applications together in a cohesive and productive system. He has dedicated his life to providing consulting services, optimizing and guiding companies to reach their ultimate potential. Thank you so much for joining us, Santiago.
Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. So let's just jump right in. The first couple of questions are going to be geared towards Dynamics 365 implementation and ERP specific questions. So we'll start off with Pangea and Santiago, if you don't mind. Let's start off with a question that is very important. How long do you think it takes to set up or implement Dynamics 365? What should the expectations be like for merchants who are looking to implement this system? And of course, Robin, please chime in with any insights that you might have as we go.
For sure.
So this is one of those loaded questions that we constantly are asked, and it's very difficult to give a straightforward answer. So I'll kind of break this down a little bit based on our experience. So it all depends literally on the implementation, on the complexity of the organization. An organization that has three manufacturing facilities in California, Florida, and Texas is going to be much, much more complex and time extensive than an organization that has one legal entity and all they do is general ledger, APAR. So, it really boils down to how the business is structured and what requirements are, what the highlight or the detailed requirements are for that implementation. The other thing that really kind of impacts implementation time and complexity and cost is client involvement. A lot of the time, the clients expect the consulting partner to take ownership of the whole implementation. And that in and of itself is going to have to be a failure because client involvement is critical to the success of the implementation. And so when we don't have clients that want to be involved, it becomes something where it's going to be a longer implementation. There's going to be a higher cost because we have to bill for our time because we have to do more work for the client. And we're also putting more risk within the implementation. So that's kind of, it's not, you can't say, one size fits all. We've seen companies that offer a one size fits all implementation. And what happens there, and generally those are for small organizations, but what happens there is the client gets frustrated because they say, well, you said that we're going to be up and running in 3 weeks. And we're going to have this and this and this, and it's not done. And a lot of the times is the client hasn't been involved, or they don't realize that one size fits all implementations are very, cookie cutter. And so they don't, they haven't dedicated the time or understood that the cost, the reasons that those are so low in terms of cost is because it takes more involvement from the client side.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I would add into that, Santiago. I think your point about client involvement is key. I mean, I've seen situations, particularly during the pandemic and what we're going through now, where we've had whole teams turn over, and that has a huge impact on continuity of a project. The other thing I often see, and I'm sure you probably see it also, is people that have not really thought through the breadth of the implementation. So what does that mean? It's, they focus on the financial aspects. Yeah, getting your AR, AP, GL, and so on and so forth set up, but they don't look at all the dependencies around the ERP change. And that can include the channels they sell through. It may be traditional bricks and mortar EDI. It may be e-commerce. It may be marketplaces like Amazon and so on and so forth. And often what we find is that those kind of scenarios are left to the very end, and they become an afterthought. And that creates a dynamic in and of itself, which is related to, oh my God, we forgot to spec this out. We don't have any budget left. And now we've got a situation where we need to get this up, and it creates delays, and it creates tension, and it creates all sorts of aggressiveness. So continuity of personnel, I think, is really, really critical as well. And I'm sure you've seen that.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. To your point, we've gone through implementations where the C-level suite has changed.
Yeah.
Specifically in our case, the CFO and the COO. And that really, it throws the whole project into a disarray. And now the client is asking for more that's outside the scope. We start getting scope creep, and no one's happy. I always say that an implementation is a bit like a marriage. So in any type of implementation, the world that you and I live in, Robin, it is a marriage. So there's going to be ups and downs, good times and bad times, but there's always the end goal, and the end goal is to be successful.
Correct.
And as long as there's involvement, communication, I think that's generally going to be the success there.
Yeah, your point on communication, I think clarity of communication, we find, much like you, we've had projects where right in the middle of it, the CFO is fired or quits, and now we have a new CFO. They're reviewing the spec. It's not what they want. It's something different. We've got scope creep. And I think that the more that you've got channels of communication, and this comes back to staff continuity as well, is that somebody is responsible internally for the project, because all of this dynamic has a significant impact on the question, how long does it actually take? And there's no easy answer, as you say.
No.
Absolutely. I love that analogy, Santiago, of the marriage. Let's move on to the next question. We're talking a little bit more about how Microsoft Dynamics can transform your business. What does that look like when that's implemented? How does it transform some merchants' businesses?
So I don't know, Robert, you want to start with that one and I can jump in, or?
Well, why don't I start with supply chain automation and providing customer satisfaction? I think a lot of companies forget the journey that the customer takes and the level of integration that's required to execute on a customer journey that is not only seamless, but that is responsive. And in today's world, that has become so critical as we're struggling with inflation. We've got supply chain constraints. You've got companies that are sitting on inventory that they can't sell or that they can't move because it's blocked. So I think having a proper system in place brings a number of things to the table. One is it basically allows you to focus on the cost of doing business, your financial performance, your customer journey, and it allows you to bring some metrics around ROI. And I think that's, at a very high level, those are things that I think a lot of people struggle with. Like I follow conversations on LinkedIn and on some of the Shopify boards, and people are struggling with how do you manage costing, how do you manage the reporting around tax and so on and so forth. So I think these are all the kinds of things that having a proper ERP like Dynamics 365 can transform an organization.
No, it's, I mean, really that customer experience, and from our perspective, not our particular client, but our client's client, that level of visibility into that client or that customer is critical. The other component really that we see a lot is minimizing, and this sounds like a paradox, an oxymoron, but minimizing complexity.
Yes.
So one of the reasons we're engaged, they engage us as well as you, Robin, is because they look at their operations and they know that they're fundamentally broken. No one wakes up a morning and says, I want to spend money on ERP. They look at their organization.
It's so true. Well, and in the fact that, to your point, it's like most people recoil. Oh, I don't want an ERP. It's too expensive. It's too complicated.
It's true. It's true. And then when you work with them and you walk them through the business, the improvements that's going to have to the overall organization and the visibility, and those are buzzwords, but at the end of the day, they're accurate. So it's that's really kind of that, reducing the complexity. I always say that, you might, Bob in accounting might do 10 less steps, but Jane in AR might do 2 more, but that's 8 steps he took away over the organization.
Yeah.
And so from a costing perspective, especially if you're going to the supply chain management or distribution, that costing is critical. I mean, you really, sometimes your margins are razor thin. So you need to know exactly, what's my landed cost? What am I selling this at? Am I making money? Does this line make sense? And that integration with the front end e-commerce piece, simplifies that whole process and allows that back office, the ERP, to kind of provide that visibility to the C-level suite.
Well, and I think to your point about taking steps out, I mean, the more manual processes that you've got around your ERP, the more expensive it is, and the less the more potential errors that you introduce into the entire process, and that has a downstream effect on your financials, on simple things like shipping out more product than somebody ordered,
right? Because
somebody made a typo,
or ordering too much.
Exactly.
We're actually seeing this with a client today that they're switching over from a industry-specific ERP to Dynamics 365, and one of their primary concerns is that the buyers internally they don't have that flexibility, they don't have that insight with the demand planning piece, and so their warehouse is full literally today, and they've had to look for a warehouse to store the overflow, which is a problem in Miami because there's no warehouses available.
Yeah. Well, I don't think people's bankers like the fact that they've got all this inventory that they're not moving on a regular basis either.
They do not.
That's great, guys. Let's move on to the third question. This is really important. How do we measure the success of the ERP implementation?
Well, the one thing to take into account is that the success should not be measured on the go live date. Success should be measured 6 months after go live. And the reason we say this is because when you go live and you flip that switch, everyone's overwhelmed. So that first month is chicken with heads cut off. Everyone, even though you did all the training, all the UAT, you walked everyone through the process, everyone signed off that they understand how things work. When the rubber meets the road, the end users, they buckle. We have a saying in Spanish, the clutch starts spinning, it doesn't engage. And so those first 6 months is basically retraining, doing the following up with support, ensuring a smooth transition as much as possible. Then at the end of 6 months, when people are utilizing the system, now is when you go back and you start seeing the process improvements and the ROI. And obviously, everyone wants to be on time and on budget. There is the reality is that on time you can almost do it. I would say 90%. Sometimes you can't because there's things that are out of your control. An example would be an integration with the bank. So if the bank is taking too long on doing the integration with the ERP, then guess what? Then you either push the go live back date to the date that the bank can work with you, or you go live and you do manual transactions. So these are the things that come up. On budget, everyone tries to go on budget, and that's always the pull and tug, if you will, with the client and with the consulting partner, in terms of you want to be on budget and the client wants you to be on budget. But then if the client wants more, they want to go that extra mile, you have to work with them saying, look, this is what we've scoped out for the project. And then you get into, change orders and so forth. And sometimes they make sense, sometimes they don't. A good partner will push back and say, look, I want this report and it's critical. Well, it's not within the original scope, wasn't done in the analysis phase, didn't come up in design. So, we'll do it for this. But before we do this project, who consumes this report? I don't know. I just want this report. Well, if you don't know who consumes it and you're just generating a report, well, then guess what? Get rid of the report. Don't pay us to create it. And I just use that as an example.
Well, and it's a good one because oftentimes what happens with ERP implementations is people try to replicate processes from the old system without stepping back and saying, okay, I'm putting in a new ERP, and if the change management is not handled correctly, then all you've got is a bunch of grumbling and complaining going on. And I mean, there's so many examples of ERP implementation failures because people have dug their heels in and they haven't wanted to change. And to your point about a report, well, just stepping back and asking, why do you need that? Is it something that's actually relevant to somebody? And in too many organizations, people are afraid to do that. And that has a huge impact. From an integration perspective, the more stability we have, the better. So the longer the ERP has been in use, the better it is because you've been able to work out all of the kinks and the data issues and all of the things related to process before you get in. Now, sometimes that's not possible, but part of the measure of success, I think, is to ensure that the short-term goals around integration and implementation get met, and then if there is change, that you have a process to manage that change. So,
yep. One of the things that I did want to talk or touch on, and it was kind of prior to the cost of an implementation, so I'll just bring it up quickly now, is the budget for third-party integrations.
Yeah.
So, and that's important for both Robin and I, because when you work with partners to bring in data from another application, Shopify, an e-commerce suite, you need to budget that in. And there's a cost associated with it. And a lot of people don't see that cost. They see the ERP and they see everything else as ancillary, but it's all together. That's the whole point. That's the reason why we're working together.
No, and that's a serious issue. We see it all the time where the integration and the third-party applications are an afterthought because everybody's so focused on the core ERP. And either they've maxed out the budget and they don't have a budget to do all this other stuff that is now a requirement, or they will step back and they'll go for the easy street, which is the plug and play type thing. Plug and play is great if your business is simple. If your business is not simple and you have any level of complexity, and in the B2B world, this is even more serious than in the B2C world. If you have complexity, then you've got to make sure that you've properly budgeted for those third-party tools.
Right. Well, thank you so much for adding that in. That's really important information. We're going to switch gears a little bit and move on to integration and ERP integration. Robin, from your perspective, let's go back to basics. Let's look at what it is and why does ERP integration matter for scaling businesses?
Well, I mean, it's really simple. It's how many people do you want to pay pounding the keyboard? And yeah, you can outsource to companies in India that'll enter your orders on the super cheap, but you lose operational control. And if you've spent the money to put an ERP in, a proper ERP, and you're managing all of the aspects of your business around financing and costing and so on and so forth, why would you not integrate on the front end? For the longest time, this was sort of like there was a sense out in the market that one had to justify integration, and I think that there's been, in the last 2 years, there's been this movement away from having to justify it, and we really move towards, if you're not integrated, what's the matter with you? And I'll throw out some stats because I think they really speak to the need for integration. And there's been a ton of research done on cost, error rates, and scalability of manual processes. Some of the best research has come out of Cranfield University in the UK. That was done by GS1 for Tesco, which is one of the large UK grocery retailers. And what they found was that the threshold where integration to the ERP for your cash to sale processes, whether they be e-commerce or POS, is roughly 25 orders a day. Once you hit that threshold of around 25 orders a day, it starts to be economically viable to pay for integration and to have that process automated. Why the threshold of 20 to 25 orders is because you start to introduce errors in the manual data entry process. The other metric, which is really interesting, is basket size. If your order is less than $100, and it depends on the vertical, but when that factors in infrastructure, salaries, insurance, and so on and so forth, if your order size is less than $100, doing orders manually, you're losing money. And a lot of people don't realize and have not thought through some of these processes. So this is really, this is a trodden path. It's well researched. There's lots of stuff out there, and anybody that's interested, I mean, we can point them to content that is basically out there. I think the other element is data accuracy, and this has a downstream effect. Santiago and I were talking about this earlier, is that downstream effect affects all of your reporting and your costing and all of the analysis you do. If your orders are wrong, if your data is wrong going in, you're going to get garbage out.
Absolutely. Moving on to our next question. What are some of the benefits of integrating? What are those key benefits that people will see once they've begun to integrate their processes?
Well, we just went through and talked about some of those, and I think Santiago, from the downstream effect, what are the things that you see in terms of where bad data hits the road?
So the biggest benefit here is, as you mentioned earlier, removing a manual process.
Yeah.
I mean, that's number one. The number two component, obviously, is, and now we get into the ERP piece, which is, your billing schedule, the invoicing piece, the tax piece, all those that's, being managed on the ERP side. It's reducing manual processes, allowing the organization to focus, or the end users to focus on more value added. And then, so from a reporting perspective and from the financial side, that integration, that it's working. And so now from a reporting side, you know exactly what your costs are, what your revenue is. So these are that's the whole overall picture. And one of the things that I wanted to mention here is there's a component to this before we even kick the wheels. There's a component where a lot of people always ask us, the analysis piece. So when we walk in, both via OMNI and Pangea, when we walk in, we need to understand how your business works. And a lot of, even if we have industry experience, there's two things I always hear. My business is not complex, which is a lie, because the minute we sit in there, it is complex. They just don't realize it, because if you're at the 50,000 feet, you don't understand that there's Bob over in the warehouse who does 34 steps to get a product out the door. Or Jane entering manually the invoices or downloading them and then doing an upload through Excel spreadsheets or CSV files with it, which creates its own level of errors. Yep. So even though we understand industries and disparate businesses, we still need to go in there and do that analysis piece. And that analysis piece will ensure that that integration and the end product, both the ERP as well as the integration with the e-commerce, is going to be successful. And then I think, Robert, you and I talked about this before in terms of the complexity in B2B and B2C that's why you have to do a deep analysis of how the client views the business.
Yeah, no, for sure. Because when it comes to integration, a lot of people figure it's just strictly a technical exercise. Well, you're just connecting this to this. And, in theory, yes, that technically that's true. We're just connecting this to this. But you can't connect this to this without an understanding of how the business operates. And so, we often see situations where people are comparing costs around integration. And, somebody says to me, well, why do you have all this budgeting in for workshops to understand order processes? Haven't you done it already? Don't you know how it works? And, the answer is yes, at a technical level, but I don't understand your business. I don't know how you do your business. So I need to understand that. How do you want tax? Do you want tax calculated in the ERP and you just want a macro number sent through, or do you want the granularity from the channel? If you're selling direct to consumer, do you want that brought through? All your ship methods, how do you ship? All your payment methods, all of these kind of things need to be sussed out. How do you discount? Out of the box, if you're fitting yourself into a solution, you need to ask all those questions anyway, because the business imperative becomes really, really key. And that's an area that we find where if you don't have the right people at the table, you're not going to get the right answers. And that, to come back to our conversation earlier about implementation timelines and so on and so forth, these are all things that will have a direct impact on how long it takes to get things set up.
Absolutely. And I think one of our other questions, you guys have touched on it a little bit before, Robin, is B2B. We know a lot of merchants are flirting with B2B right now and looking at that as a vertical. What are the key challenges that come with B2B that might differ from B2C?
Yeah, B2B is a really, it's the next frontier in e-commerce. Everybody's focused on direct to consumer stuff, which is great and is very, very cost effective for a lot of brands and a lot of organizations. But I had a customer say to me, all this B2C stuff doesn't make any sense to me, because if I sell 1,000 onesies to 1,000 individuals, I've got to pick and pack each one of those. But if I'm selling a pallet to Costco of 1,000 eaches, it's a lot more cost effective. So this has led to that transition towards B2B types of e-commerce. The biggest challenges we see are people selecting e-commerce platforms that are not designed for B2B. They don't understand that the very complex pricing matrices that you can set up in an ERP are not necessarily transferable to a B2B e-commerce platform without a lot of work. And a lot of people, I think, have not researched how they're going to how they're going to implement and how that's going to affect their distribution channels and their sales reps and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of things that people need to think about. And in fact, we could do a whole webinar just on e-commerce in the B2B space. So.
And you bring up, I'm sorry, Robin, go ahead.
Sorry, Santiago. No, I was going to say, I'm sure that you see the same thing.
Yep. And you bring up a very good point with regards to, complex pricing is available in the ERP, but it's not available in the B2B platform. So a lot of the times, not a lot of the times, it happens. But I hate saying, all the time. It's one of those things where catch-all phrases. Clients will say, well, if it's in the e-commerce solution, it must exist in the ERP and vice versa.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then that's not the case. And so, you might get, I always say, if we get 80% of the way there without any customizations, or now Microsoft calls it enhancements, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. But, we have to do that 20% that's unique to your business. Well, we got to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think that anybody venturing into B2B on the e-commerce side has really got to understand, first of all, strategically, what do they want to accomplish? Second of all, what are the processes that they want to implement? Like, are they going to use the e-commerce platform as an order portal that feeds their ERP? So they're small guys that don't do EDI, for example. Are they going to order that way? Is it going to be used? We had a salon supply company at one point. Unfortunately, they were a victim of COVID, but they were using Shopify to in the field. They had on an iPad, they had Shopify, and their sales reps were going around to the salons that they were selling to. So it was a B2B process, and they were actually physically entering the order because the salons didn't have time or didn't have the skill set. So it's all of these kind of things that you need to think about as well before you just dive into it. Sales reps get their noses out of joint really quickly when the sales are not allocated properly.
Right.
So that's another whole area that you have to think about. So I go into it with eyes wide open is what I say to people.
Yep.
Yeah, eyes wide open. That's a great piece of advice. Looking at reasons to partner for Microsoft Dynamics and financial operations in particular, what is the benefits and really the reasons why it's important to have a partner advocate for you, both from a Pangea perspective and a OMNI perspective? Why don't you both give me your thoughts on that?
Santiago, you start.
So from an ERP perspective, Microsoft Dynamics 365 Finance Operations is a tier 1 ERP. So it's a very complex system if you don't understand it. Within our organization alone, we have to have specialists in different components, different parts of the application. On top of that, every 6 months, Microsoft is adding functionality. That's part of the Microsoft roadmap, Release Wave 1 and Release Wave 2. So if you don't have a trusted partner, someone that understands the application, has individuals within the application or within their organization that are experts in components of the application, it's going to be very difficult for you to self-implement. I wouldn't even say difficult. I would say near impossible to have a successful implementation. One of the things I always say is, I don't know what I don't know. And I tell our clients this as well. We understand this. If you ask me a question about, well, a diesel engine I actually do know how to do, but how to build a gas engine, I don't know that. But if you ask me about the accounting piece within, finance and operations, I know that. And our team is designed, we're here to provide that knowledge, to transfer that knowledge to you, to our clients, so that they're successful and they continue growing, utilizing the application. So really the partner is we're there to handhold. We're there to provide insights into what you don't know. And to be honest, one of the biggest components is also pushback. To my previous point, if you replicate a bad process in a new system, it's still a bad process, and it's still not going to be successful. And a good partner will push back. The idea is not to build till the cows come home. The idea is to have a happy client that's going to continue working with you in the long run.
Yeah, I think Santiago, the other thing is that you have to view your partners whether it's the ERP partner or third party that's adding functionality to the ERP, as a trusted advisor. And I think too many companies go into these kinds of implementations with an adversarial kind of approach where, oh, you're just trying to extract money out of me, and you're nickeling and diming me because you bill like lawyers, and then blah 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 blah. And the way I position it is that so many of the channels we sell through require levels of expertise that you can no longer have the one neck to choke, which was 15 years ago or even 10 years ago. That was the way people wanted. They wanted the one-stop shop where I went to you, Santiago, and you provided everything because, you were the expert. But the world is way, way more complex. Like, I think of the things that we run into, just trying to integrate Shopify, for example. What are the plugins that you're using? How do those plugins interact with the cart? If I'm selling on Amazon, what are the things that I got to think about? I mean, this is domain expertise.
Right.
And this is where, like, I'm not an ERP expert. I do understand accounting, but I could never implement an ERP. I'm an integration person. So where you want to look is you want to look to have a trusted group of advisors that can guide you on best practices for your business, where, to your point, you're being challenged, because if you're not being challenged, you're not making progress. And we see this time and time again, where the customer dictates simplicity in the relationship with a desire to have the ERP vendor try and do everything. And in the end, they're very dissatisfied because they haven't brought domain expertise to the table. If you're implementing complex manufacturing processes, do you bring in a generalist or would you bring an expert in? I mean, that's the way I basically look at it.
No, and I agree. And one of the things that we always try, and that's one of the reasons that we work well together, is that we know what's in our wheelhouse.
Yeah.
E-commerce integration is not in our wheelhouse.
Yeah.
And for us to build something for one client that, again, we don't have the experience on it, so it'll be a headache on our side and on the client side. And at the end of the day, for a one offer, it just doesn't make sense. It's better to work with a partner such as via OMNI that has that level of expertise, that brings it to the table where you feel comfortable that it's going to be successful because they've done this many times before. Mm-hmm. And that's, my recommendation also to anybody out there looking to implement an ERP or an e-commerce solution is, find someone who's in this world, it's a specialist. It's you can't have someone who does it all. The minute you see an organization that literally does it all, I've seen people that do Sage, SAP, and Microsoft Dynamics. It's impossible for that organization to be proficient in 3 different ERPs. And within those ERPs, within those companies, you have multiple levels of ERP. So, if someone is Dynamics 365 F&O, then that's what they do. That's what we do. If someone is e-commerce integration via OMNI, that's what you do. That's how you guarantee success on the project.
Yeah, no, and it's to the point now where, the stuff is moving so quickly. There's so much change going on. You look in e-commerce, we've had this evolution from direct to consumer. Now you've got B2B that is becoming a critical component. I mean, if you don't understand B2B, how are you going to ask the right questions? If you don't have a partner on the ERP side that's open about functionality, or is not willing to work with a third party, then it comes back to implementation timeline, success, the ROI, and all of that. You have to have the right players at the table. And unfortunately, having the right players at the table sometimes costs. And too many companies go into this looking for easy street, cheap, do it quickly. I don't have a lot of budget. And I mean, it's a world where you get what you pay for.
Yep.
So.
Absolutely. Those are really key points. Thank you both. Our last slide here. I know the discussion has already touched on this, but Robin and Santiago, what might be a case study that Pangea and VL, having previously worked together so far, that has benefited from the solution of both implementation of the ERP and integration? Can you speak to a particular past customer that maybe can share a little light on the successes of this joint solution?
Yes. So we have a client, and we can't name names simply because a lot of people are like, what's the name? Well, it's, the clients like to hold on to, they don't like sharing that.
Everybody's under NDA. I hate
Yeah.
NDA, but everybody's under NDA.
But this particular client is in the apparel industry. And so they have a B2C or direct to consumer, which is a very small component of their business, but they also have the B2B, which is, I would say, 90% of their business. And so working with them and working with the VL Omni team, we worked on implementing the back end, the ERP, which was a year-long process, simply because we're moving from a legacy system, an AS400, into a modern tier 1 ERP. And so we had to do a lot of, I hate saying the change management piece, because I look at it from a process management change. The change management piece, we're not going to convince the end user, you have to use this. That's the top down. We're there to redesign their process. And when working with VL Omni, they had a lot of manual Excels or CSV files that they would download, they would upload. And working with VL Omni, we were able to completely simplify that take away that whole manual process, making their lives that much easier and allowing them to repurpose individuals that were doing manual entry into other more value-added roles within the organization.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think you've, I can't add much. I think you've summarized it very nicely. I think at the technical level, we were able to utilize API functionality within 365 that opened up processes that could be automated more efficiently and eliminated manual processes. And that comes back to the ROI that we talked about. Is that sometimes it's an intangible where it's really difficult to measure, but other times it's really easy to measure it, because to your point, Santiago, you're rather than letting people go, you're redeploying them into more value add. And that's something I always say to people is look where you can put people into value add, because it gives them more satisfaction in terms of the job that they do.
Yeah, those manual entry jobs, there's a huge turnover on that, because sooner or later, we had a little story. We had a client. I'm not going to name who and where, but it was in Latin America, and we had implemented the ERP, and they were a bottling plant or a distributor of alcoholic beverages. And in this particular country, they require another label on the bottle before being sold, stating XYZ, this is bad for your health, so on and so forth. And when I visited the facility, they had about 4 or 5 ladies with a bunch of stickers all over their arms and everywhere, and they're just grabbing bottles and putting stickers on, And I asked them, I go, well, why don't you just get one of those machines that'll automatically put the stickers on? You can use these ladies. He goes, look, we did the math. It's less expensive to have 5 ladies put stickers on than have the bottling machine. But to their point, or to their credit, 3 years later, they did install the machine because of the turnover. Yeah. This is a job that you can do with your eyes closed, but after a while, you just don't want to do it. Yeah, it's mind numbing.
It's completely mind numbing. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it was an interesting day.
Well, and that's, there's also this culture of rather than pay for it, I'll just hire somebody to do it. But people lose sight of the costs associated and the error rates associated with it as well. So,
turnover. You hire someone to do a job and they quit. First of all, it's going to take them 3 to 6 months to ramp up. And then if they find another job, especially in today's market, within 8 months of that, you've basically spent money, 6 months training somebody on a job that is not fulfilling, and then now they look for another job that is fulfilling.
Yeah,
And so
exactly.
now you have to retrain. And so a lot of what you and I do is really kind of, this automation is basically ensuring business continuity.
Continuity. Yeah. It's mitigating risk.
Yep.
Yep.
That's a fantastic way to look at it. Thank you so much. I think we are now in open Q&As. If you haven't already, please add some questions into the Q&A chat, and we will get to them. We have just a little bit of time. We are on time. Let's see here. Let's look at a question. Do I need a dedicated project manager to implement finance and operations?
You do not if you expect to fail. If you want to succeed, you need a dedicated project manager. And a lot of people, we've divested ourselves of these clients. This is back in the day when we did Microsoft Dynamics Great Plains, but basically, we would put into every statement of work or every change order project management hours, and generally it was 10%, 10 to 15%, which is on the low end. A lot of times it's 20%. And now for F&O, it's about 20%. And some of our clients, this is back in the Great Plains days, would say, I don't want to pay for project management. And we learned, as the saying goes, and education is expensive. So we would take out those hours, but the amount of time, the back and forth, the managing of the project, we would have to consume those hours. And then no one was happy because the client would say, well, you're not on top of my project. I go, well, are you project managing it? Because we took the hours out. And so now the client's not happy, we're not happy. And so what we decided moving forward is every project has a project manager and there's hours associated. If you decide not to use a project manager, then guess what? We're not doing the project. Yeah. It's going to fail across the board.
Yeah, we do the same thing. Like we have a project management tranche that is based on the discovery that we do and what the customer asks for. When we get into comparative pricing and people look at us versus another solution, they say, oh, you're so expensive. Well, yeah, but is the other person offering the project management component? Is the other person offering, or the other third party offering workshops to do the due diligence and the discovery? And it turns out that at the end of the day, no, they're not. They're just plugging in a solution, and it's those plug and play solutions. In our business, we call them plug and pray, because it's really, if you're not managing it properly, you may as well start praying that you're going to be successful.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point. One of the things that we've seen, especially when we're competing against other organizations, is the foot in the door method. And we actually, this happened to us with a client, with a prospect in London, UK. So we're competing against this other piece of software that doesn't have near the functionality of F&O. And before we even put together the statement of work, we did a little bit of discovery. And so we sat down with the C-level suite. We asked them how many legal entities, this, that, and the other. And based on that, we put together our proposal. We get back, they say, well, you're 800% over your competitor. And and if we're 10% over, you have that conversation, well, this and that, but 800%. So if I was that CFO, which I was not, that would have been a red flag. I would have said, wait a minute, what's wrong here that these guys are quoting this and these guys, the other. And so be aware when you're dealing with other partners, that there's clarity and transparency in the numbers. If you tell the partner you're working with, the consulting firm you're working with, hey, it's 25 legal entities, and they scope that out, well, that's because that's what you told them. If you say, oh, it's a one legal entity, that's what they're going to scope. Now, if you say to the competitor, it's 25 legal entities, but they only scope you one, and you don't do your due diligence, well, guess what? That's where an education is expensive.
Well, and the real price is 1 times 25.
Exactly. Exactly. But no one sees that. Everyone scrolls to the bottom of the statement of work and says, that's the price.
Well, Santiago, I always say in our business that when people don't understand what we're presenting, they gravitate to what they do understand, and everybody understands price. Mm-hmm. So, if they're not willing to stretch intellectually to understand what the package is, then they're going to go, oh, they're so cheap, I'm going to go with them. And to your point, surprise, surprise.
Yeah, and the problem with that is, once that bell is rung, you can't unring it. So once they go down a path that they know was a bad path, 20% into it, no one is going to say, look, I'm going to raise my hand up. Let's get rid of this. The sunk cost. Let's move on to something else.
Yeah.
Their job is on the line, their reputation. And so that's, generally a done deal.
Yeah, exactly.
And just as a follow-up to that question, we talked about the importance of a project manager. What other resources would you recommend merchants have already in place before approaching either Pangea or via OMNI for implementation and integration?
I mean, one of the things that we see a lot of in terms of disconnect is not having the right people at the table. So you've got people that are having conversations around one part of the company, but you don't have people from other areas. So I always like to see people from operations, from finance, from the supply chain side, so the buyers in the warehouse, because the more input you can get, the more holistic a view of an organization you're going to get. And you're going to understand the dynamics within the groups, within the organization, and potential conflicts. And that helps you manage that entire process.
Yep. It's interesting how during the analysis and the design phase of a project, we're sitting with the end users and they say, well, this is what I do. And so this is how it works in the organization. And then you see another person from shipping say, no, we don't do that. We do it this way.
Yeah.
And so that disconnect, which is, it's natural. They're working in different parts of the organization, but that disconnect really can impact an implementation.
Yeah. I think also people underestimate and we see this just in e-commerce in and of itself, but when it comes to an ERP implementation, I think the other element is people don't appreciate how widespread the impact of these changes are going to be across an organization. And the bigger the organization, the more siloed stuff is, the harder then it becomes to bring the groups together to find common ground.
Definitely.
Fantastic. Okay, if there are any more questions, you might just want to leave them in the chat and we will be sure to follow up with you. But I just want to take the time to give some contact information. If anybody is interested in Microsoft Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations, you of course can go to Pangea Consultants. Santiago, I'm sure will be glad to speak to you. Please visit their website, www.pangeaconsultants.com, and Santiago's email is listed there. Please give that a write down and save that for some excellent advice there. And on the integration side, if you're looking for e-commerce integration to your ERP or other applications, you of course can go to www.viaomni.com. And of course, there's Robin's email towards the bottom there. He of course will be very glad to give his expertise with any questions that you might have. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, everybody who's taken the time. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much to Robin and Santiago. Your insights were so much appreciated. I really appreciate it.
It was our pleasure.
All right. Great. Have a great day, everybody. And have a great day. And if there's any more questions, please contact us.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you, Santiago. Thank you, everybody. And Jewel, thank you for your post as well.